Now, the president's partisan address this evening comes as the battle for the Republican nomination rages on, with the Florida primary only 1 week away. And among the final four candidates hoping to walk out of that Sunshine State with a win next Tuesday is former Massachusetts governor and presidential candidate Mitt Romney, who joins me tonight from the campaign trail in Florida. Governor, good to see you again. Welcome back.
Thanks, Sean. Good to be with you.
All right. I know, one thing that was interesting, Charles Krauthammer made an observation here is, this was the guy a few years ago. He was going to heal the earth and prevent the ocean tides from rising. The one observation I had is you've had 3 years. What did you accomplish with $5 trillion in new debt in 3 years? But what was your observation?
Well, I had the same feeling you did, but I also looked at a president who I think is disconnected from reality. I just don't think he understands what's happening in American homes across this country. People in the middle class in America are hurting. The median income is down 10% over the last 4 years. I'm here in Florida. They have almost 10% unemployment here, and the real unemployment rate is about 18%, and that includes people underemployed or stopped looking for work. People are hurting in America, and he seems to be saying that America's on the right track, things are going well. That's not what I'm hearing. I just sat down with a group of Floridians who've lost their homes or who are out of work. They're not feeling like the policies of this president have made things better. As a matter of fact, his policies have made things worse.
What about his line that America is back, that anyone who tells you otherwise, anyone who tells you that America's in decline, that our influence is wane, doesn't know what they're talking about? Is America in decline? Is America back, in your view?
Well, he hasn't made things better. And there's no question about that. This is a president where the gap between what he says and what he does is so enormous that sometimes you just watch the TV screen and you just shake your head in amazement. I mean, he laid out how he wants to lower regulation, even though, of course, he's raised it dramatically. He talked about how he wants to lower taxation, even though, of course, he's raising taxation. He talked about taking advantage of all energy resources, although, as you know, he's made it harder to get oil, coal, natural gas. I mean, what he says and what he does are so dramatically different that you're just overwhelmed with that. And frankly, we have to remember that he was in power for the first 2 years with the Democrat House and Democrat Senate. If he really believed these things, wouldn't he have done these things when he had all that power? Look, this guy has failed the American people. They're suffering. They know it, and he doesn't know it.
It's interesting. It's different what he says and what he does, because he talked tonight. If we followed the example of our military, we can all work together, that we've got to lower the temperature in this town. Now, this is the same guy that said if they bring a knife, we bring a gun. This is the same guy that says Republicans want dirtier air and dirtier water and less people with health insurance, which is fundamentally untrue. I want you to argue with them and get in their faces. So he says, well, let's all come together. Let's be civil. But that's his history. And I can give you numerous other examples. So what does it say that he said he'd cut the deficit in half? He said that George Bush was unpatriotic, because he had a $4 trillion debt in 8 years, he has $5 trillion in 3 years. What does that say about him versus rhetoric versus what he does?
Well, you're saying just as I feel, which is that he says things that the American people agree with and nod their head to. Lower taxes, lower regulation, take advantage of our energy resources, crack down on China, consolidate our training programs. I mean, we listen to a lot of those things and we nod our heads, except we look at his record, and he did just the opposite. He talked about how we're stronger internationally. We have even more influence. This is at the very time he's laying out proposals that cut our military budget by almost $1 trillion with the deal that was done with Congress. He's taking America's military to a point where we cannot fight 2 wars at once. We can only fight 1 war at a time under his policies. We've had a 2-war policy since Franklin Delano Roosevelt. He is weakening America militarily. He has weakened our economy. He's weakened our family values. This is a president who I believe says one thing and does something very, very different indeed.
Governor, you recently released your tax returns, and on these returns they showed that you paid about a 15% rate, by the way, which, as the IRS numbers pointed out, which is what about 97% of the American people pay, and that's less than 15%. But I wanted to ask you this, because I don't think anyone in the media brought this up or has taken the time to ask you. Is this a second bite of the apple for most of this money? In other words, did you pay tax on it earlier, and then this is the second tax, for example, if it's a capital gains tax?
Well, in my case, the taxable income was overwhelmingly capital gains, and the first bite of the apple is, of course, at the corporate level. What people forget, the reason that we have a capital gains tax rate, which is lower than the regular tax rate, is because the corporations we're getting a capital gain tax, or getting a capital gain from, have paid taxes themselves. So the corporate rate is 35%, then capital gains is another 15%. So you have to look at both levels of taxation to understand why we have a 15% capital gains tax rate. And there's another reason we have that lower rate. We want people to invest in America, to invest in companies, because as they invest, it creates jobs. The president wants to raise the capital gains tax rate. If he does so, he will kill job creation in this country to some degree, depending on how much he raises it. So, and by the way, with regards to my own taxes, I'd like you to also point out that in addition to the 15% paid to the government, if you add up all the taxes I paid, as well as charitable contributions, it ranged between about 32 and 42%. So I'm giving a pretty healthy slug back to our community.
Well, by the way, you did a lot better than Joe Biden's $367 that he gave in a year, and the 1% that the Obamas gave when they were making $1.22 million. They only gave $10,000 in those years. But putting that as a side note, all right, let me go to the presidential, the nomination campaign.